Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Our subject today is the plight of the Lubicon tribe located in Alberta, Canada. In order to discuss this very, very important subject and what has been happening and what is anticipated to happen, I would like to welcome to our program Father David Lundeen, who is with the St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Spokane. Father Lundeen has spoke on our campus today, and he has been speaking throughout the Pacific Northwest and is organizing in relation to this question, and we're going to discuss all that with him today. Father Lundeen, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Tom.
And I'm happy to welcome to the program today to assist with the questioning a panel member, Richard Snyder, who is with the Department of Anthropology at North Idaho College, and I will invite Mr. Snyder to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. I'm particularly interested in being here today, an anthropologist, and my interest in the native peoples of North America. Father Lundeen, who are the Lubicon Cree people?
The Lubicon Cree people have for traditions, for centuries, traditionally lived in an area about 65 miles northeast of Peace River, Alberta. They're a band of 347 Cree, traditionally again living approximately on 9,000 square miles between the Peace and the Athabasca River.
Well, it's my understanding that they've been living there for a long time, but right now they don't seem to have anywhere to live at all. What's going on?
What's going on is in the first instance, when the Canadian government in 1899 attempted and did in many ways sign treaty with different bands in the west of Canada, missed this band. As trappers and hunters, they pretty well were going where the animals were, where the food was, where the trapping was. They were missed by treaty. They weren't really known to the outside world until the late 1920s, 1930s, when a missionary came out of the bush and informed the governments that this band of people existed. They were essentially a lost tribe. Until then, they were just not known. And only until recently have lived traditionally the way they wanted to, and now with huge oil and gas exploration in northern Alberta, they've been found out. They're viewed by the provincial government as squatters on this land now.
Thank you.
I would like to continue to pursue that, and we're going to get into some of the legal questions that brought this about, and the economic, and then what has happened to them. But as you indicated, I believe they are the only group of people, the only tribe in Canada that does not have a treaty, or did not have a treaty in the past with the Canadian government, or recognized in any way. However, they were there before the governments were even organized. Approximately how long has the tribe been in that location?
Some genealogical studies have indicated that they were there at least as early as 1750. The traditional oral history given, from generation to generation to generation, says the oldest man in the band remembers from his parents' parents that they've been there as long as anyone can remember. The Alberta government evidently is convinced that's true. They think they came from someplace else. They don't know where, but they're trying to say, well, they haven't always been here. So there's a big argument about that.
Let's move in, and this is going to take some time to unravel this story and the importance of it. Since they have been there for so long and they have a way of life, I wish you would take a little time to tell us a little bit about what you did earlier today, the kind of people they are. I understand they're very peace-loving people, and they have made their living and survived with a very specific way of life. And would you give us that story?
Sure. Their traditional way of life has been twofold. Number one, hunting. Number two, trapping. Hunting has been, over the centuries, done primarily with moose as the main food staple to the tribe. The hunters have gone out in the past anywhere from 2 to 5 or 6 miles and been able to successfully hunt a moose. Some of the hunters, when I was up in January, I talked to, said their moose kill 3 years ago was something like almost 200. 2 years ago it was less than 100, and now it's down to 19, and this year I guess they've only seen 3. The trapping, though, has been the other staple economic activity that the band has engaged in. The trappers are very, very experienced. It's been a tradition and a style handed down from generation to generation. They'll go 20, 30, 40 miles out into the bush, even range way beyond 50 miles. They have their set trap lines and their snares, and they'll have up to maybe 2, 3, 4 cabins, and they'll work an area. They'll go out in the bush for 2 or 3 or 4 months. All they have is 4 dogs and their sled, and they come back with the fur-bearing animals, the lynx and the fisher and squirrels and other small fur-bearing animals that they get, and that has been their economic base and income for them.
Father, that continued until very recently, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was around 1981 or 82, anyway, it's very recent. You can bring us up to date. After oil was discovered in that part of Canada, both the Alberta provincial government moved in with some decisions, and then the multinational corporations, oil companies have come in. Would you take us through that chronologically? When did that happen, and what happened to their land and happened to the tribe, both from the economic basis and the legal questions?
Okay. It'll be quite a venture.
Yes.
The venture really starts out in 1979 when the province of Alberta decided to build an all-weather road out north of Peace River. Following the completion of that all-weather road, because recall this is tundra-type country and very cold, most of the oil company activities are done during that cold time. When the ground begins to melt, it gets too soft and their equipment sinks. But essentially, that all-weather road was built by the provincial government of Alberta northeast of Peace River, 65 miles. It has since gone beyond that. But following that all-weather road came in all the oil companies to do their gas and oil exploration. With the oil company activities, when they lay down their seismic lines and they start blasting, when they're crisscrossing and their cuts, disturbs the game and the natural game in the area, as it would any place. That, with the huge road building equipment and so on, essentially drove away the game for which this band depended on, as I said, their food and also their income. So that to the Lubicon Lake people has been pretty much taken away from them, the opportunity to get the game and also to get the fur-bearing animals. So their last stand right now is one in which, how do we survive without our traditional way of life? What do we have to go on? They can go further and further out into the bush, but the animals just aren't there. The animals have also been found dead with the waste ponds that come out wherever you have oil activity, I understand. They've gone in and drank the water and ended up dead. So that type of activity has pretty much disrupted the life and the style of the people of Old Buffalo Lake.
In addition to the road that was built in by the government, and I assume that was to give access to the companies to come in to do their drilling.
Right.
Now, those companies are there, and they have been drilling, and they are taking this resource from the land. Could you give us some idea, a little bit of vividly, the picture of how that construction is moved forward, and at this date, what kind of, financially speaking, amount of resources have been taken from the land?
Well, my understanding, and again based on people I've talked to, especially the Chief Bernard Aminiak, says there's approximately 80 multinational oil companies now there. They're United States oil companies as well as Canadian oil companies. They've totally surrounded the area that is regarded as the Lubicon Lakes people's traditional area. The activity is such that between the oil tar sands, or whatever they're called, and the oil fields that they've found, the derricks and the pump jacks, there's essentially over $1 million a day being pumped out of that area alone. So when you add that up to the life of an oil field or an oil well, if it lasts for 30 or 40 years, we're not talking about millions of dollars, we're talking about billions of dollars now.
You indicated to me earlier that you had heard from some of the people you have interviewed that maybe as much as 500 million barrels have already been removed.
Yes.
And you also were quoting a statistic that if one took the figure $13 a barrel as a reasonable price, you'd already be speaking of over $6.5 billion in revenue. Would that be correct?
Right, that would be correct. Now those figures may not be exactly precise. I guess it would behoove somebody who really wanted to know truly what was coming out of the ground to approach the provincial government and the Canadian oil companies to find out and get a much truer number and a truer figure how many barrels are being pumped out.
Richard Snyder.
It would seem to me, and you've certainly indicated, that Lubicon cultural traditions have been severely disrupted. In your opinion, is it possible that these people could be relocated somehow, that their tradition can continue, or is this the end? They've been destroyed and that's it?
The destruction has been to a cultural way of life irreparably damaged. In other words, that damage, those oil fields and those derricks and those pumps aren't going to be removed. The effect that this activity has had on that band has disrupted its way of life to the point of being irreparable. They can never go back to that tradition which they have lived for these many, many years. It is no longer an option to them. As far as moving, no. Bernard Aminiak, again, the chief, has said what we're fighting for here is our land base. Because the federal government missed us and we never signed treaty does not mean we are still not the Aboriginal inhabitants of this land, and we have Aboriginal claim. What we need and want and what we are fighting for, according to Bernard, is that land base. They then could have the alternatives of looking at lifestyles towards which they may still retain some of their culture. For instance, raising buffalo was considered as maybe an option they could look into, raising horses, raising wild rice. Don't forget, it's a short growing season. It is in the Salinas Valley of California. It's severe weather up there, and the severity of the prairies in the wintertime is difficult. But they are looking at land management if they are ever able to get this land, which is traditionally theirs, given back to them by the federal and provincial governments. That's what they want.
Well, it would seem to me that if they're the Aboriginal population and they have certain rights as the Aboriginal population, they need only go to the Canadian courts, and that should settle it. Have they done this?
They've done it on 2 occasions, and they've lost both times. The first time, what they did was try and get an injunction to stop the oil company activity until such a time as their land claim was settled. What happened is the judge in that case found against them in every case by saying that since their traditional way of life was no longer an argument, because that had ceased to function, even though it was due to the willingness and knowledge of the province and opening up that area for gas and oil exploration that disrupted that way of life, they're saying that is no longer an argument. The argument also is a balance of convenience. Who stands to lose more here? And really what happens is the government and the people stand to lose more, and the oil companies and the income, than 340-some Indians. So they lost that injunction. They appealed it. And essentially when in Calgary in March, I was there on the 10th for one hearing. It may not be the 10th, but about there, March 3rd through 10th. During that period, they had an appeal, and a lawyer from Montreal came in and at his own expense to appeal appeal before the courts, and he lost in every case again. The Indians lost again, and they found against them and said that the appeal was worthless. They wouldn't even agree on terms such as what irreparable means. They have since sought legal aid in terms of appealing the appeal to the federal court. They're hoping that the the federal government would look at that. The federal government is probably not too anxious to do it immediately. The band also is considered going before the United Nations Civil Human Rights Commission, and they have that in process now, I understand. And hopefully, if the Canadian response to the United Nations is such that it shows admissibility, the United Nations may hear their cause.
Well, you've indicated that an anthropologist, Joan Ryan of the University of Calgary, has, I believe, studied this group of people and made certain comments. What she had to say about all of this?
Joan Ryan has studied dying cultures all over the world, and what she has said essentially is that in a year or two this culture may be dead, may be no more, that it is a dying culture, that the pressures from the outside world and the oil company activities and all the rest going on has affected the transmission of those cultural values that have been assigned and given from generation to generation, so that a trapper could tell his son and his daughters what do you do when you get married at birth and death, how do you hunt moose. Pretty much that anymore is given away to a future that at best is bleak, and the elders have no answer for it. They don't know what to do themselves. So that cultural transmission and those values has been successfully interrupted to the point that that is a dying culture.
Just one little short last thing here while I'm on this particular segment. There was no particular indication that the Lubicon Cree were a dying culture before the oil and gas exploration. It was only as a result of it.
Yes, as a result of it.
Thank you.
Father Lundeen, I would like to take the legal question one step further. You've indicated that they were there for many generations, and that when the exploration took place, they have been removed from that portion, or at least their hunting grounds and so forth are gone. And when you go into court and the two parties argue before it, the government has a position of why they could remove them, and the tribe indicated why they should stay. I believe you've indicated that the court ruled on 2 points. Would you give those to us, please?
Yeah, the one, as I mentioned earlier, was a balance of convenience. In other words, should this go against the Indians, who would lose more? Or if this were to go against the oil companies in the courts. And from that argument alone, they said that the oil company and the province would stand to lose the greatest. So from the balance of convenience, you see, the most people being hurt are not the Indians. All right. The other argument was simply that by the band's attorney arguing a way of life was invalid because that traditional way of life no longer existed. So even though they themselves, in my estimation, and it's a personal thought obviously, were as much at fault in terms of destroying that tradition as anyone by granting the oil company through the legal rights to go out and seek and drill for oil and explore. They're culprits in it. And what they're saying is your argument is no longer valid from the standpoint of this is your traditional way of life, even though we have been culprits in effectively destroying that. It's no longer a valid argument because you no longer live today the way you lived, 10 years ago.
Wasn't there also a delay in the legal process before this decision came down? So did that have any impact upon the whole process?
Yeah, it's a matter of backing up to a point at which I'm very, by an honest statement, not too knowledgeable, but it had to do with a caveat, and I can't really discuss that, but for my understanding is essentially 3 consecutive years, that time at which the court had before it a case and could have heard it was used from the bench by judges making determination of whether they should hear this or not. And it was during that period of time when the roads being frozen are most accessible and most construction can be done. I think if one were to look closely at the legal implications of this and the legal background and what happened since 1979, 80, 81, 82, and 83, could find a pattern that says the activity of the courts coincided with the activity of the oil company, at which time it's most propitious for them to be doing their construction and their drilling, and they can't do it in the spring or the summer. So you see there's a connection there between what the courts have done and the process, and also what the oil companies have done.
One final legal issue that you've presented here today that has to do with the legal process after the decision had been made and the tribe had lost. There were court costs and charges. Who bore those expenses?
The band did in every case, which meant they were not only financially responsible for their attorney and attorneys, they were also responsible for the provincial attorneys and the oil company attorneys as well.
Do you have any, in your consultation with the chief, do you have any idea what that's coming to in cost for the tribe?
He's led me to believe it's over $2 million so far.
Okay. I would like to move in another area before I return to our panel member. You came to us today to speak on behalf of this issue, and from your literature you have indicated that the Lubicon tribe is in great financial stress and need, and I believe there's a number of organizations in the Spokane area. I have before me the Spokane Christian Coalition and the Church World Services and the Diocese of the Council of the Episcopal Church and the Roman Catholic Diocese, and then I see the Spokane District United Methodist Church on your list. So a number of religious organizations in particular are working together. Would you share with our viewers what you're doing in relation to this issue?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Tony. I essentially went up to Canada and spent from January 3rd through the 10th visiting the area around Little Lubicon Lake, which is now Little Buffalo Lake, by the way. This is another story. They have since left their traditional grounds, and they are living now at Little Buffalo Lake. But I got to meet the chief and band elders and got to talk with people. Spent some time up there, and including one day in the courts in Calgary, and then came back and based upon my experiences, what I heard, what I saw, as much as what I felt, was that indeed when the World Council of Churches made a statement and said they felt that this was a genocidal situation, the provincial government, of course, tried to discourage anything that the World Council of Churches had to say. But following that, a group of bishops from mainline denominations in 1984 visited the band and came away after 2 days visit, held a press conference, and said effectually that all those things that the World Council of Churches alluded to were in essence happening. A traditional way of life is being lost. And they were concerned, so concerned that the Anglican Communion in Canada gave to the band $10,000 a year for 2 years to help defray their legal costs. It isn't much, but the churches up there have been concerned in writing letters. So based on that the knowledge that I had gathered up there and some readings of materials I brought back with me, looked to set out to do 4 things. Number one was to bring the attention of the United States citizens, particularly here in the Pacific Northwest, most especially the Inland Empire area, about the plight of these people. 2, in order to help do that, was to be able to convince the chief to come down and spend a week with us and go in various communities, which we've just concluded, by the way, this last Sunday. So we have been, the chief and I and 2 other band members, as well as a band advisor, from Sandpoint to Kellogg to Omak and Colville and Spokane and other areas, talking about the issue, and he's able then to personally answer questions that are raised from the audience and be able to discuss the situation much more knowledgeably, obviously, than I am. The third point then was, once people were aware and concerned about the injustices, hopefully they might do something like write a letter to the federal government and say, hey, we're aware of this and we're very concerned and we would like to see you do something about this issue in terms of what is right and settle it. Number two, to write the provincial government in Edmonton, also letting them know that we are very concerned and as citizens of the world in what's taking place in Canada. That was the third thing. The fourth thing was to put together a food drive, and this is now in process.
Very good. Thank you.
Oh, I have to follow up on this food drive. Okay. Are these people are starving to death, and you're going to send food up there? What's this food drive?
Well, I can't say that they're starving to death. It's probably a position in which they have less and less and less and less food. There are people that are on welfare. Essentially what we're trying to do is on April 13th, the week after Easter, assemble food that we've been collecting from all over and head north by convoy from Spokane all the way up to Little Buffalo Lake, which is over 1,000 miles, to deliver the food to the band and to the community, at which point they can grub stake the trappers having to go out further and further into the bush now, and also to allow for the people to process to get some food, but to be able to work for it. In other words, in terms of community service, that they just don't want a welfare thing. And that's some of the things we're doing with it.
So let me interrupt just a minute, because when this program airs, it will be just a little past April the 13th.
Oh.
So those who have not heard about your food, are there other things that they could do in contacting you or to assist in your efforts, other than food? Or could they contact you in Spokane? In other words, I'll give you this opportunity to indicate if there's anything else other than food that you'd like to have support on.
Pretty much the writing letters and you know, writing to us if they want further information, to invite us to speak to different groups. We'd be willing to do that. If you'd like the address, I'll give it to you.
Yes.
It's Father David Lundean, Lundean, and it's the Lubicon Lake Indian Project, North 2404 Howard Street, Spokane 99205. And the area code is 509. The phone number is 328-4389.
Okay. We're just about out of time, but in closing, with about a minute that we have left, would you indicate that what you see as the forecast of what may happen down the road in the next year to this issue?
I wish I could say, Tony, that I had a very optimistic attitude in what I saw. I guess the battle lines are clearly drawn. It's pretty much between the province and the band. Until the province moved, I don't see any reconciliation. I see a further road a tougher road for them to hoe. With our help, whatever we can do.
I'm sorry, we're out of time, and we'll have to go at this time, but I would like to inform our viewers that Father David Lundean of the St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Spokane has been with us. He's been discussing the plight of the Lubicon tribe in Alberta, Canada. I hope you've enjoyed our program today, and that you'll be with us again next week at the same time, when we'll interview a personality on a very important subject. Until that time, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.